What's popular, YouTube? Another day, another podcast. Today, I'm doing a podcast, the NACS podcast here with none other than Note. He is a writer for HLTV, specifically in regards to NA and NACS, and that's what we're today here to save and talk more about. Note, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah. How
Yeah,
about you? Back from traveling?
back from traveling over in Europe. The grass is pretty green, I won't lie. The CS was very good. There's tournaments, there's prize pools. People seem to be happy over there. So that I think the idea is trying to figure out on this podcast why people are not so happy over here. Of course, in recent times, we've had some of the people who are behind organizations and stuff come together and have started having conversations with people, in private about some of the gripes within the scene, and some of the discussions have been started about what is really, wrong with our scene, and what is the real state of things. Is it dead? Is it dying? Is it unrepairable? Is it what are the issues? So that's kind of what we're here to discuss. And the reason I want to bring you on Note is because I feel like you have really good. I like how, first of all, I like when a player in MDL says that they're, getting drunk before their relegation match. You will call them out. You'll at them and call them out on Twitter. I really appreciate that. You hold people accountable, and I think we need someone pointed who does the research, who is there, boots on the ground in North America, to come on the show to discuss these things. So I don't want to hold back with what we talk about. And that's it for the introduction. You ready to get into the podcast?
Definitely.
All right. So
Like
how's
you,
this?
you even brought up something that I'm gonna bring up later, so it's perfect.
Oh, perfect. Let's go. All
Yeah.
right. So how I want to start this out, basically, I want this to be like a very important piece of content that is one where we both bring in points that we've thought about a lot, but then also have the opportunity to discuss. But I want to be the layman and let you take the lead on a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to start out by asking you a few yes or no questions, or just one word answers, and then we will start to like lean more into a discussion where I don't have much of an outline for that. We've just got a bunch of stuff, and I'm sure we can fill it up. So we're going to try to keep this as tight as possible, but this is not always the way that it goes. And we can, if you've got questions in the chat, feel free to bring them in again later on when we can start to talk about them. But for now, this is something that's going to be on YouTube and is live right now here on Twitch, twitch.tv/launders. So, okay. So first, yes or no question. Are you, Note, optimistic about the future of NACS?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Next question. Is it possible for NACS to die completely under some circumstances?
Yes.
Yes. Does Valve need to step in to save NACS?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think no.
Okay.
I don't think we require Valve to step in.
Are salaries too high in NA?
Now, no.
Okay. And do you feel we as a community are talking about the right solutions to save NACS?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay, so that's the final yes or no question. Let's talk about that for a second. What is your opinion there when I say, do we feel like we as a community are talking about the right solutions to save NACS based on the discussions that you've seen and that we've heard of recently between figureheads in the community or people behind the scenes? Where are the I mean where is the conversation leading right now, as people are like, what are people saying are the pain points? What do you think is the right direction for the conversation in general?
So, from what I've seen, there's been a lot of talk about like formats and the way stuff is currently structured and the way that uh, obviously the ESL Pro League franchising thing, cutting down slots in North America and whatnot. But there's just so much that contributes to where we've ended up right now that you can't really take a single factor or even like two or three factors and say like these are the reasons we ended up here,
Hmm.
because even before ESL cut down their ESL Pro League slots, there was a lot of issues in North America. That was more or less like the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't it wasn't like the sledgehammer that knocked down the building blocks or something like that.
Hmm.
Um,
So
go
how did we get here? Like what exactly happened? Was it the fact that Valorant scooped up a bunch of players because there's like insane salary inflation over there? Like we know in Valorant that there are players that are getting almost 30K a month or even more for going over to Valorant. Is that something that we have to think about or that we can kind of ignore? Just something that's going to happen over there while they have their salary readjustment period down the line. Is that how this all started? Is it because of Valorant?
I don't think it's because of Valorant, but Valorant definitely accelerated the rate at which stuff was going downhill for North America, I would say. The fact that we didn't have a lot of organizations picking up North American teams, and then you have all of these organizations come into Valorant and they're now offering these players who have been like strung along in CS without a salary, who have been waiting for an organization to pick them up. And now it's sort of like they're giving you that lifeline, right? Where they're saying, hey, we'll pay you to come play this game instead. Like most of these players are going to take that because playing like an esports title is more or less their like goal, right? And so when you have that lifeline finally offered to you, obviously you're going to take it. It's like a no brainer. And that's why I'm saying like there's no way you can really blame any of these players for switching games either, just based on what's led to it. That being said, I think the players are also a major factor in the reason we've ended up the way we are right now.
And
Like their attitude and the way they approach some of the games is also like a major factor in the way that stuff just in general went downhill. Like if you on your organization top point, like the number of in-game leaders we've lost in North America, or like very experienced players that we've lost, is also sort of like it's tied into not having organizations around to be able to pick up any of these players after they leave. Like Nitro left the Valorant, even though he could go down to a lower team. Nothing, Sean Garris, Steele, like a lot of the experienced people who actually have the potential to bring up upcoming talent have all left, right? And if there's no organizations around to pay them like a decent salary so that they can continue playing the game, then there's no reason for them to stay. But then you go and look at Denmark, you have like Hundun, you have Glaive, you have so many, you have Snappy, you have MSL, you have so many different like experienced players that are there to actually hone these players into something and teach them the skills that they actually need. We don't really have people like that anymore.
mm-hmm.
And the people we do aren't coming down to help the younger players either. Like once they leave their big teams, they're not coming down right now.
Now you could say that about a scene like Poland, for example, that just they suffered post Virtus Pro. There was no infrastructure there in terms of players that were willing to take risks on new talent or have multiple teams with a lot of experience on those players. And so it feels like comparing North America to Denmark's a little bit tricky because they've done some they're like the prime example of how your scene should look with like all the same local amount of local lands plus a lot of leadership and for whatever reason, great leaders. And I guess reason to stay in the game because like the best team in Denmark is like the best team in the world. It feels like most of the time. Is there some kind of balance where we're not exactly Denmark in terms of how much talent there is there, but then can also keep our scene propped up in some sense?
I think there's a lot of talent in North America. Like a lot of these players are very skilled. There's no doubt about that. Like the level of individual skill they have can be very high. It's just the fact that none of them build the right foundation to the point where when you reach something like an MDL, if you're having to rebuild that foundation, you've just wasted the last 2 years of your CS career like building very poor habits based on like how it worked for you before. So now you don't have to like you never had to really build up those sort of skills, and now you have to do it from scratch when you're an MDL,
Mm-hmm.
and that just resets you again. Also, like I've seen 3 of the teams that qualified for MDL through advanced relegation this season. They're already making roster changes. Like one of them dropped their in-game leader, and apparently they're not dropping their in-game leader. Like, how are you so on the fence about stuff like this when you just qualified for MDL?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are these still things that are happening? It baffles me that the stability in these rosters is also so short term that none of these players can actually think to actually build somewhat of a foundation and allow their roster some more time to
Mm-hmm.
actually gel. Like you're never going to build anything from that.
Yeah, so a couple things. Like I see it the same way. Like the region. Like I paid for this Steam Spy thing to figure out how many people were like coming from which region when it came to CS, and it was like across the U.S. it was like 8% of the total player base, which is massive considering how many people are playing CS right now are from the United States. So it's hard to understand why why like MDL and Pro League are now like have been like emptied out, but that there's still apparently tons of people playing the game and lots of them coming from the United States. Do you think that this like talent vacuum is just going to sort itself out? Is that why maybe you're optimistic about the future, just because the player base is there, even though some of the top level teams or players have left?
I think the right factors have to come together for us to bounce back from this. It's not something that'll just happen naturally. Like if you let it happen naturally, sure there'll be a period where we'll get somewhat of a player base back and there will be some form of growth, but I don't want personally I don't want stuff to grow back the way it was before. Like I see this as a chance for like a second renaissance sort of thing for North America where they can actually approach the game differently. We have enough new people coming up. We have enough of the old people gone that you can actually try and change those building blocks and foundation to actually allow for proper structure coming into it. Like this is the time where we should be seizing that opportunity for it.
Okay,
So that's why I'm optimistic. If people actually take that and run with it, then we actually have potential to come back fully into it.
Yeah, though, and the way I see it is that there's a certain amount of infrastructure in place for anybody who wants to try to succeed, right? It's not like we're trying to build up a scene in the middle of Asia where there's no prize pools, there's no regional slots, there's no, like, we have everything in North America. We just are missing some of the top level players. But they were also, and you can disagree or argue with me on this, they were also gatekeeping a lot of the positions at that level. And at MDL, there were like a certain number of just like lazy MDL players who were good enough to play in MDL, but not willing to move up and not willing to let new people in, basically by holding them down, by keeping their spots. Do you disagree with that? Do you think that like that's just something that'll just be filled up by new players who maybe they won't be chasing the dream of just getting like a really quick salary? Maybe will be, there because they want to play CS. They think they can be the best, and then they can like actually it'll just be like a fresh chance for North America to fill up Pro League with good talent.
That's my hope. And what you're saying is like when you say something like they actually have the drive to be the best, I think that's really key because that's something that I feel has been missing for a lot of these players. Like when I looked at some of these MDL players and even some of the cusp of Pro League players, it just didn't seem like they didn't have the goal of being the best team in the world. Like they just don't have that mentality. And when you don't have that drive and mentality, you're never going to be able to, like when you hit a barrier, it sets you back rather than becoming something that you're going to try and push through. And when that happens repeatedly, then you're never going to be able to move past those barriers. Also, to your original point, it's that the reason I think right now we might be able to have more of a bounce back is there's going to be less focus on like pugging platforms like Rank S, Rank G, FPL. There's going to be less focus on that sort of individual play. It's obviously still going to be there as something that people can play after scrims or practices. But the fact that my hope is that we're going to have more like team-based, whether that be cups or a winners league or mythic league or like anything more team-based is going to be able to build those fundamentals up a little more because then you're rewarding the team structures instead.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like you were part of organizing cash cups over rewarding players for the individual play, which, leads to less individualism, which has always been a problem in North America, which is why you have roster changes at the end of the season. Like I'm sure you knew the answer to that question, but it's just something that's just part of the culture, is just that everyone's very fickle. And that's also part of the reason people might want to jump to a new opportunity for like a quick paycheck or whatever, an easier opportunity. So can you talk about the idea behind cash cups and what effect that's had?
Yes. Well, the original idea behind the cash cups was that I was looking at how much money FPL and ESEA distribute via their platforms, and then I looked at the fact that the prize pool for winning something like MDL season 34 was 30 grand or 35 grand total, and that only gets distributed to the top 4 teams in the league. So even if you make playoffs, you're not guaranteed a prize pool. Placing first in playoffs gets you $12,000 or $12,500. per player. That's around $2,500 for an entire season of playing, roughly 3 months. You go and play an FPL for a week and you place in first, you've already made more money individually. You make $5,000. Like the incentives for playing pugs and for tuning out of your league matches is like it's whether players think that they're doing that or not, there's always something in the back of your head which is like, okay, practice over now, time to go play pugs or whatever. That's always going to exist, even if it's not something you're actively thinking about. If you're gonna be that focused in, if that's where your income source is coming in, then obviously like you're gonna have a bigger incentive to play in those leagues play in those pug platforms than you are in taking your league matches as serious, for example. Like, that's not to say they don't try in their league matches, but if that disparity exists, it's going to set back stuff regardless, right?
It's like asking someone to train to be good at two different scales completely, right? To take their team practice seriously, to win potentially one prize at the end of 2.5 months of work, which there is nothing more defeating than like losing that one playoff match that, results in you not being one step out of the prize pool or not being able to move up and then having to rinse and repeat. That's why a lot of the problems exist. But other regions survive that. But North America specifically needs just an extra push when it comes to helping people get their priorities in check. And that's where kind of cash cups come in. So like what kind of money? So let's say, do you think that the infrastructure is good where it's at? And do you think that like if you were, let's say, a main plus level team, an advanced level team, so you're maybe one of the next to potentially take over some of the open MDL positions, or like take advantage of a weak MDL at the moment. Would it be reasonable for you to be like, all right, we're good enough to like play in these cash cups and do well, plus like try hard in our MDL season, or is there need to be more infrastructure in place to incentivize people to stick around?
I think there needs to be more infrastructure just based on the fact that Europe has a lot of external tournaments as well. Like, not just Denmark. If you look at Europe as a whole, they have so many external tournaments that you can make it more or less a full-time job being able to just play in all of these leagues by themselves. Because if you're signed up to 4 or 5 different leagues that all play in a month and the prize pool for each of these leagues is $100, $200, $300,000, even placing in 6th, 7th in these tournaments, you're still making money. So the incentive of playing in sort of those tournaments, it just allows these teams to be able to have more of a base in Europe, right? And if you don't have that in North America, which we won't, as far as I can tell, just based on the fact that we don't have the legalized betting infrastructure for most of America and Canada, then we're never going to have the players able to sort of build around that structure. So to me, a lot of this change has to come from FACEIT and ESEA, because they're the ones who already have the infrastructure in North America. They're the ones who have a foothold in the scene. They're the ones who clearly have the money. It's just not being used correctly.
So that was one of my yes or no questions, was like, do Valve need to step in? And so I think the way you're framing this is that, well, Valve have not done anything to prop up North American CS in the first place. So we've kind of gotten to a point without them, but it's FACEIT and ESEA that have provided basically all the ways that you can make money or see a future for yourself in the game. So is there a specific onus on them to just increase prizes, and and if that's true, where should that money go? And by how much, where and how much?
I don't think increasing the prize pool of tournaments will inherently actually benefit the scene just by itself, if that makes sense. Like, if you increase the prize pool for MDL to, I don't know, 50 or 60 grand, sure, it'll provide more of a benefit to teams. But regardless, even if it's still that you're distributing that prize pool for the top 4 teams, the other 12, 14 teams in the league are not going to have much of an incentive to play during the regular season. Also, like, even if you have a $60,000 prize pool for the league, the fact that is the last 2 weeks of the season is just, it's not going to be beneficial to the other teams again. So there either has to be a restructuring of the format in something like something like MDL, or you need to reduce the overall number of teams. That's the 2 avenues I can really see being able to incentivize some form of change on both the player side and on the viewer side. Because let's say you have right now MDL is 18 teams, I think. let's say you cut that down to something like 12 teams or 14 teams, right? Then you have more focused viewership around a smaller number of teams. You have players able to follow individual teams a little bit, or sorry, viewers able to follow individual teams a little bit better. They're not keeping track of 18 teams. Let's say you have 12 teams in there. There's always going to be incentive to play during the regular season, right? Let's say that you have the top 8 making playoffs, bottom team getting auto relegated, next 3 going to the relegation. You always have something to play for in that structure. Right now, you have that middle ground in MDL where there's always ends up being 4 or 5 teams during a season that have really nothing to play for midway through the season. They're out of playoffs contention, or they're on the cusp of relegation. That's really the only 2 times you see someone playing something like that, right? So either there needs to be some change to that format, or there needs to be like external tournaments that come in that actually allow teams more viewership and more overall content, I guess. But if that was to come in, then you need the players to put in like effort on their own end.
Mm-hmm. I think there's one of 2 things here. So I think that there's the argument that, like, you know, the way that if you watch MDL matches, it's not obviously like MDL in North America is like not even close to. There are some, like, I feel like intermediate teams in Europe that would beat MDL teams in North America. Like, no kidding, that's how stacked it gets in Europe. But it's not necessarily. It's just basically that, like, we can't put together teams that are good enough to compete at a higher level. So do you think it's the way that we watch these MDL games that makes them less appealing, or the way that people talk about, like, the brand of NACS that works against it? Or do you think that the teams themselves need to get better on average as well? Is there onus on the players to, you know, basically improve their level of CS as a whole, like culturally, or is it just like or is most of the onus on, like, the brand of NACS and, you know, how it's marketed and, like, how much content goes into MDL and stuff like that?
I think it's a combination. I think changing the structure of MDL and the viewership incentives will be a benefit overall. But again, it has to come from the players to start. And by that, I mean that the players tend to they show up for matches, they play, and then they dip out. That's how I feel like it is for a lot of teams right now. Obviously, you have like the 4 teams who are salaried, maybe a couple of other teams that are actually putting in time to practice, that are actually putting in time to do server time independent of just scrims. Like, they're going into a server for an hour or 2 hours figuring out how they want to dry run something. A lot of these MDL teams aren't even doing that, which is absolutely shocking, honestly. But when on top of that, you also have a lot of these players, like you have Dust2 US, which I've written for 3 years, 3.5 years almost. I've written for that website, and seeing that site get so little support from MDL players and advanced players is actually baffling. Like, if you go to dust2.dk and you see the traffic on site, not on Twitter, if you go to their site and you look at the comments on their webpage, the number of players who are just part of the community, but also players who are in these leagues, who are all commenting on these articles, who are actually like actively discussing something, that just shows you that they are inherently tied into the scene. That's something that we don't have. Like, you'll see when Dust2 releases an article, there'll be some players who occasionally comment on it, but like the same level of support is never offered to North America, it feels. And like from the players,
and we're just people on, you know, one side of the pond or the other. So what is the difference? Why is it that there's so much more community involvement, you know, amongst players with these with the websites? Like, they both provide the same service. So of course, Dust2 DK is just a European version, and it's older. It's an older site, so it's been around a little bit longer. But as you mentioned, Dust2 US has been out for, what did you say, 3 years now?
Yeah, over 3 years now.
So what is the you know, to really like zone in on this, what is the issue there, do you think? Is it just like how cool it is to use the site? Is it content that comes out is not as frequent as it is on the DK version? Is it what does the attitude of a player in North America have to do with, like, their willingness to be involved more with the discussions online?
See, that's where the question becomes a little harder to answer, because I'm honestly not sure as to what we can do to incentivize players to look at Dust 2 more. We've changed the way we cover different things. Like, for example, I pushed hard to stop covering like the FPL Rank S recaps because I didn't like the hard focus on like individual leagues like that. They do very little to actually benefit the scene other than offering players some avenue of money. So I pushed really hard to stop that and try and do more like interview coverage and more like in-depth coverage of players individually. That's something I'm trying to gear towards. But again, these players, like when we private message them, they seem to think it's like they seem to, I'm seeing in the chat, like I've seen ego come up a couple of times, ego and arrogance, which I find does tend to be the case for a lot of these players. Like not all of them, obviously. Some are actually really good about it. Some are very good at talking and approaching us. But when we, for example, reach out and we ask you about a roster change, we're not asking to like shit on you guys on Twitter or in an article. Like we're genuinely trying to build up the scene by giving good coverage around as good coverage as we can. Mm-hmm. And when we're asking you for a statement and you're going like, we dropped him. It's like, that's not going to benefit you. It's not going to benefit us. Like, or even then, if you just don't reply, and then when we release our article and then you message us saying, oh, you got this wrong, or like, this is incorrect or something like that, there's a reason we reached out to you in the first place.
Sure.
Like if you're just not going to respond to us, then there's very little we can do in that scenario, right?
Totally. And I think, I mean, for me, working at events and stuff, working with players, it's hit or miss. Like some players are very good about their obligations to a tournament. Some don't show up for interviews. Some are late. Some are lazy. And that's just people, right? But it feels like there's more of that in North America, always has been. I mean, that's why you go back to like whatever early 2000s, the Shaguar, it feels like he says that North America will never win a major, you know. Little do you know, Stewie would roll around. No, I'm just kidding. But he said that because he felt like people cannot work together. That people in North America, this would be a cultural problem that would follow us for a long time. So this like kind of attitude change that I think we all know is the elephant in the room in this conversation. It's a bit harder to talk about, but it's certainly a driving force of like what leads to a lot of the complications. Is there anything that can be done about that?
I feel like the players who are coming in, like the new players who are coming into the MDL scene, need to be given space to take charge. Like these players need to really allow these newcomers to actually blossom. For example, when I interviewed Saturn after that whole Russian Canadian situation, I'm not sure if you know what happened, but for background for people who may not, basically there's a team in MDL that placed 7th to 8th last season, and they qualified for playoffs. And just before playoffs, they forfeited their last game, I believe, or they had a player not show up to their game.
Oh, I think we lost you. Oh, no. Give that a second here. Oops. Sorry, guys. Hopefully he reconnects in a second. I'll just wait it out. I'm going to send him a message, tell him he dropped in case he's still talking. Legend has it he's still talking. I said, you dropped NA internet. Lol. Just to talk about the brand of the culture. So conversation's going pretty good, right, guys? I think oh, we got you back?
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay.
Okay.
Where did I get cut off?
Well, you can maybe just start from the Saturn situation again.
Okay.
Circumstances.
So basically there were two players that didn't show up to MDL playoffs for Saturn's team. And this kid is like a 17, 18-year-old kid who's a really, like, he's an up-and-coming player. He's new to MDL. I talked to Sheikh Zula, and he mentioned him as a player to look out for just based on playing with him in FPL. And then you have this kid get done so dirty when it comes to playing in MDL. You have him show up for these playoff matches. He's trying to individually message these players on his team saying, can you come show up for playoffs? Mm-hmm. And these players they just don't show up with no message. They go radio silent on Twitter for almost like 2 weeks. And then one of them comes out with an apology saying he was dealing with his own issues, which I guess fair enough. But like, at least communicate that, because if you told your team before that, or you told ESEA, then maybe they could have taken the ninth place team and allowed them to play playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, you had this team just back-to-back forfeit the entirety of playoffs, basically.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, like when you also the two players who didn't show up for those, or one of the players who didn't show up for that playoffs match, is now coming back this next season and rebuilding the roster with other players. So like, how does that happen, right? How does that, it feels almost backstabby in that sense. Because these players just don't care. They lose motivation halfway through the season, and then they get it back miraculously next season, and then it's gone again 2 weeks into practice. So like, seeing stuff like that happen just makes me feel like the old guard really needs to step aside in some, like, not necessarily step down, but put your ego aside and allow these other players to come in and actually give them a chance, and actually allow teams to build up some form of stability in their roster.
To be honest, and I don't know if this ties in, but this is why I'm personally pretty optimistic about NACS, because I feel like the talent is there, but there was, again, a lot of gatekeeping when it came to talent that we're just not going to try hard enough, or holding a spot, or just good enough to play and have some success, but not really give it an effort to like compete and think about an international level of team, right? I think, in my opinion, there's very, very talented players in North America, and a good amount, like a good pool to pick from. And it's really just a lot about developing those players. And I think, in my perspective, it's really about more people understanding what jobs are needed. Like there's always been like a lack of operas, for example, or a lack of IGLs. It's like, why come in and try to be like a star rifler or like a specific type of player where there's tons of overlap when you're trying to fill in what people need in a season? You know, the way to do that, if you were going to go job hunting after school, you wouldn't apply to a field that gets like the most amount of applicants, right? You'd go for the field that has like a high pay with like a low amount of applicants, so you have a higher chance of getting that. But it feels like people aren't necessarily thinking about their position in the greater scheme of things, and just thinking about what they want to do the most. Being an IGL is, of course, not that fun. There are some natural leaders that, even if they don't like the role, they're going to be good at it no matter what, and those people should continue on being IGLs. But there should also be people who don't like the role who should realize that being a good IGL is like one of the most valuable assets you can have. And like, it's not like the tools aren't out there to learn. There's every demo available on HLTV. There's tons of professional content made by pro players, made by YouTubers, and what talked about constantly all over the place on podcasts. There are the tools, and you can see visibly whether or not your team is actually getting to that level to compete, either at an international stage or at the top of invite in North America. But it doesn't seem like there are the IGLs right now to get teams over that line.
Also, like, wow, I had something in my head and I totally lost it. But on your point of in-game leaders in North America, like that's a major issue when it comes to when players do decide to be in-game leaders, the sort of pushback they get from other players when they're not as skilled on the server, or they've put in more time into server time rather than like DM. The sort of pushback they get based on just not being skilled, but being able to lead an overall structure in the server, it's just, it doesn't seem like they rate it as highly. And when you don't do that and you're cutting your in-game leader and not actually understanding what they bring to the team, then you're never going to allow those roles to actually blossom. Look at Sheikh Zula. He's like one of the few players who I think have like done that very well. And even he gets wrecked over and over and over. He had Floppy and OC. They get taken to ATK. He had Grim. He gets taken to Liquid. He has Junior. He's rumored to Furia. He had Curry, who left to college. Like, every good player that he really built up has gotten somehow pulled out of his team. Mm-hmm. Which obviously, like, a lot of these players get, like, obviously you're not going to deny an opportunity to Liquid. You're not going to deny like a salaried opportunity to Cloud9 or ATK or whatever. But the fact is that how many other players can you think of off the top of your head like Sheikh Zula in North America?
Yeah. I sent him a message the other day, and I was just like, listen, I know you're unappreciated, but like keep doing what you're doing, because it's just adding so much value where we don't have much.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing more that you can say. Poaching is also another big problem for the orgs that come in. Do you have any thoughts about that topic in specific? The fact that you could be a Triumph and then put together one of the sickest up and coming rosters that we've seen in the last couple of years, and then have your best player just bought by Liquid. There's nothing you can do about it.
Um, I honestly don't think poaching has been a massive issue in North America.
Okay.
I think like they knew that Grim was gonna. Nobody is turning down an offer to Liquid from like a Triumph. There's 0% chance that that's ever happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think poaching has been as big of an issue, but I do feel like a lot of these in-game leaders who have brought those teams up that are getting players poached don't get the credit they deserve for being part of that, part of building that whole thing up.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like for a lot of these players, if you think it's too late to become an in-game leader, it's not. Like even if you've been a star rifler your entire career, it is never, never, never too late. Like look at Nitro. He was one of the best riflers in North America. He was rated as being like one of the best cash players in the world. And then he just switched to becoming an IGL, won Intel Grand Slam in like record days. And it's never too late if you actually put the effort in. But that's the problem. I feel like a lot of these players aren't willing to put that effort in.
Mm. So what is the incentive for orcs to come into the scene now to pick up a roster? Are there enough incentives? Is it too much of an uncertain time for it to be smart to come in at the moment? What do you think the landscape of the scene looks like? Is this something like a self-rehealing process where players get good over the next couple seasons and then eventually fill up the MDL slots and then the orgs, come in from there? Or is this something where orgs could really help supplant some of the necessary incentive to get players to, commit a little bit harder to the game? Which one do you think is more important to kind of start off with?
I think it's both, honestly. I think it'll take a couple of seasons for players to build back up, but I also think organizations should be coming in right now. This is like the best time to buy low sell high that you could possibly imagine.
Go for the pitch. What's the pitch to a new org that wants to come in and buy a team in a world where there's like infrastructure but there's not a lot of orgs?
If you're a team that's going to come in and buy, or if you're an org who's going to come in and sign a team, now is the best time just based on the amount of talent that's available, and also the price that you're going to get a lot of these players for. The only thing that I would say is that if you're going to do that, you also need to have the back end infrastructure in place, or you need to have a person in your organization who is actually tied into the CS scene, who's willing to be your sort of intermediary between the players and your organization. Like they need a contact point, and you need that person to also like show these players the ropes, get them to be on the server on time for their matches. Not when you see that 30-minute window of showing up to an ESEA match 15 minutes before or 15 minutes after, maybe don't be there 15 minutes before, but be there dead on time. Have all 6 of your people on the server. Stuff like that. Like it's really small, but building up habits like that over time is like very key for a lot of these players, because when you get to an ESL Pro League, you're not showing up to your match 15 minutes late. Like Rebirth did this. I'll call them straight out. They did this when they were playing DreamHack or ESL Pro League. One of their players showed up super late. Apparently he might have gotten into a car accident. I don't know if that's true. I haven't heard like confirmation from anybody about that, but like if that's true, that really sucks. But at the same time, like, why are you driving home after your match is already scheduled? Like you should already be at home. But anyway, regardless, like be in the server on time, have your players like willing to take interviews, do interviews for broadcasts. Like, also like tell them how, like be the intermediary between like media and your players, so that your players don't have to reach out, or like we don't have to reach out to players to get comments on something. You have somebody who just is independent, who knows what's going on. Mm-hmm. It's not a difficult task, because there's plenty of people in North America who would step into a role like that for you. So like if you're gonna take a team, have somebody like that, and I guarantee you're gonna have more success than like other organizations who come in and just scoop up a team for one MDL season.
Yeah, so buy low, sell high. I mean, the opportunity couldn't be more obvious in that regard. If you're, and so I guess, okay, so what's the buying strategy here when it comes to looking at talent? Do you look at some of the talent that's left over that are now orgless? How low do you go when it comes to buying new players, and where, like, what level do you invest at? Like, are there enough players in MDL right now that you could put together another roster that you feel like could be a moonshot pick to get to pro league?
Yeah, I think so. Here, let me pull up MDL from last season,
Let's do it
and
right
I'll
here.
answer that question straight up for
It's the
you.
most important NACS podcast right here. So if anybody's going to try to find out how to get involved in the scene, they're going to come right to this video and listen to what you're about to say. So we're looking
So
at,
right now
yeah.
you have the Whalers who are teamless. Okay, the former Whalers squad who are now orgless, and I believe they're picking up Fang to replace B-Wolves. But you have Benleet, who's a very experienced in-game leader on that team. You have a good structure built around some of the players. You have Podolone, who's like a
He's
very
a god.
talented opera, especially for his age. Like, when was the last time you saw like a 30-year-old opera putting up numbers like he has?
Can I just
It's
go
been
on a
a
rant for a second? People should stop
go for
talking
it.
about age, okay? Because Conor McGregor got his ass beat by Mayweather, and Mayweather's 42 with brittled hands. Like, if he can do that, if there are F1 drivers that are racing at 180 miles per hour and they're well over 30 as well, why the hell can't we play games at a high level? Like, no, it's no secret that you need to, have some reactions and stuff. But if reactions matter at CS, they matter in boxing, they matter in F1, and everything else that comes with age is also a positive. The amount of experience that you have, you're gonna have a better attitude, even if you're from North America. Being older, it's gonna be easier to work with. Ponelon, I don't care. The only thing that could change for him is that his priorities change. He's not gonna fall off because of his age, so he's definitely worth picking up as well.
Um, just as another point, like a lot of these teams aren't practicing right now. They haven't been practicing this last season. So you're also not breaking up structure if you decide to pull players who are like acquaintanced from different teams and just build your own roster. There's a lot of talent out there that you can build off of.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we were to ignore Whalers entirely and you just look at the players who are in MDL, Curry said he's willing to come back if he gets an organization salary. Okay, if he gets like the right offer. You have Curry, who's an excellent entry fragger. You have someone like Fugly, who's an experienced player who's playing for fun on X Recon 5. You can probably grab him. You have Viz, who's put up very good numbers in just 2 seasons in MDL. Like, there's a lot of talent spread out across these teams, but you have to actually like look into the players and the teams and go and try and scout these players out. You have Saturn on Russian Canadians. You have like you had Mata, but that boat has sailed, I guess, because he's now playing Valorant. So a lot of these orgs have to take the opportunity before it leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't miss the boat on some of these players because they are good enough to go play Valorant. And if you miss that boat, then you're gonna have to wait for them to either come back from Valorant, or you're
Yeah.
gonna have to wait another year for other players to get that sort of experience built up.
Now, of course, there are situations in different titles where the game dies or a scene suffers because the game is bad. In Counter Strike, our primary concern is the staleness of the game, but not the game itself. I don't think the meta's ever been really in a better place overall. The how good the maps are, how exciting the top teams are to watch. It just keeps getting better and better, to be honest. At least more so in Europe, but
Yeah.
overall, like the level of the game and everything, like at least we don't have the problem of like the state of the game. Like, it's not like our very best player in Overwatch League is leaving the game after getting the MVP to go play Valorant, where that's like he specifically hates Overwatch. Like, we wouldn't even, it wouldn't be a point to talk about this podcast and all of the extraneous issues that are happening in our scene if it was actually just the game that was shit. And I know my experience talking to these players and hearing about some of the conversations with some of the players who moved over to Valorant, they don't want to move. They're actually would have been really happy to stay in CS, but the thought of going over and getting a really big paycheck is an issue. Like, that's something that's like, why would you turn that down? And we, like you and I both said, why? Of course, you cannot blame them for wanting to do that. But having the opportunity to play in CS, they would stay and they would achieve a lot. So this is a really great time right before some of the top tier picks maybe start to, look towards playing Valorant, just because they want to go try it. Like they love CS, they still want to play CS, but they're not afforded the opportunities. So couldn't really be a better time from that perspective to get in. And that's not to say that people like genuinely don't like Valorant or something. Like there are people who genuinely like love the game so far, like really want to play it. It's of course still early days, but yeah, there's in my from the conversations I've had, I know a lot of players that were scrambling to try to find orgs. I personally tried to help out and get orgs for some of the players that have decided to pick up and leave, and they've had some conversations. But the salaries that are available to them for a player who's not even shown anything in Valorant is kind of insane. Like you can just be a CS player and have like
Yep.
you've got a 20-year Steam coin or a CS 20 coin on your profile. Here's 15K a month. Like that's actually how bad it is at this point. Oh, you're a global elite? Come play Valorant. Like that's really the state of things at the moment, which makes things really difficult. But I like you. I'm optimistic about the actual future because it just feels like this is a an unforced dip in some sense because it just happened to us. But it feels like there's this vacuum of players that can come up kind of way more easily than ever before. The obvious irony when it comes to like markets like this is that when people are leaving, that's when more people want to leave. But when people are leaving is the best time to come in. But then, of course, when things start to heal, people will start coming in. The game will start getting very competitive again. And there would have been a chance for you to be at the top, for you to have taken over at MDL or gotten into Pro League. And it would have been your easiest opportunity ever. And we can literally see that it's not the whole game. It's actually just one side of the world, right? In Europe, things couldn't be more healthy. And also another point to talk about, you mentioned it's like, loot bet cups and different gambling sponsors that are available in Europe, and those aren't available because of the gambling laws in America. That stuff is changing soon, actually.
Yeah.
The laws for that should be changing, and they were predicted to change this year, but of course, not the best circumstances. And maybe we'll talk about that as well in a second, but not the best circumstances for that change to come about. But next year, there is a world where that there are gambling sponsors allowed in America. And for CS, we account for like 60% of all of the betting in esports, something absolutely absurd like that, to a point that it's incredibly toxic, but also opens us up to tons of money. And that would help out a lot. So there is also the thought of coming in now and then having that opened up in the future, maybe as soon as, Q1 next year or Q2 or something like that. And right, picking up a team while they're still cheap. So do you have do you just like a list of players you want to just throw out there in case somebody is listening that's like, I don't have a talent scout hired to my org, but I'd like to like to figure out who is good and who isn't.
For MDL?
Yeah, you can go like no order, not to measure them against each other, but just like here is a bunch of players like you feel like are very promising that you think deserve some attention or would be good pickups for future teams.
I think Curry is excellent if he actually gets the opportunity to still play this game, because right now it's between Valorant and college for him, and CS obviously. Like if he gets the right offer, he's willing to stay. You have someone like Viz, VIZ, not WIZ, because these players have the same sounding names. He's really good as a rifler or an opper as well. You have Sneaky, who I've seen less of myself, but I've heard good things about him. You have Saturn, who's also like actually willing to put in the time and dedicate a lot of effort into getting better and putting in those practice hours. You have Fugly, who used to play pro and hasn't like actually taken the game serious in a while because X Recon 5 wasn't really practicing. It was more of like just a squad that Valens put together. But Fugly still has a lot of talent. You obviously have like the team coming into MDL now, which is going to be a lot of fun to watch actually. I think people should keep an eye on Civ or Vic from GGPR. He's supposed to just turn 16, I think, before the next MDL season starts. So he actually wasn't even eligible to play until this next season. But one thing I do want to touch on quickly is you were mentioning like a lot of these players said they wanted to play CS and they do want to play CS rather than switch to Valorant. And it's easy to say something like that, but you also have to commit to that. And and not in the sense that you have to commit to playing CS over Valorant if you get an offer or something, but I mean that you have to also show that CS is what you want to play. And by that I mean you have to be practicing and putting in the right effort and putting in like the proper, not to like hammer this nail anymore, but I can't really emphasize it anymore that the quality of practice I was seeing and the stuff I was hearing from teams is just like, you say you want to stay in this game and you say you'd stay if you got an offer, but what are you doing to earn that offer? You're not doing much. You're not like, the players who are doing it have nobody else on their team who's doing it. Like you look at Saturn, he's putting in hours watching. He's not even an in-game leader on his team. He's putting in hours watching demos. He's putting in hours learning other teams' setups. He's like changing his own game. Where are the other players who were doing that on his team? There weren't any. And the same can be said for most teams. Like you need that individual effort from players to be followed up by organizations. It doesn't, one doesn't come before the other in that sense.
So we talked about a lot of good stuff. And before we get to the end here, chat, if you have questions, I want you to, because you guys have been having like really good like discussions in chat. There has been too much to read. I've been trying not to read into it too much, but if you have a question or something that you want to bring in, this would be a good time to talk about it. And just before, you take a second to figure out what those questions are, I just want to get like, from your opinion, Note, have you felt like that the current conversations around solutions are the correct ones? Are people moving in the right direction as a like behind the scenes, or do you think that there's something that's seriously missing? Or what would you say are the list of priorities right now for what needs to be looked at or talked about to move things forward?
I think the people who are having conversations behind the scenes they're on the right track because they are changing what they have control over. If that makes sense. Like the people who are trying to make these changes behind the scenes can only do so much. And what they're doing, like there's the conversations are obviously still ongoing, obviously, but like the changes that can be enforced from like a TO side or a team side or like HLTV side, anything like that, there's only so much we can do, which is why I've been so like focused on the players in this podcast, because like if there's one thing that has to change outside of what's already being done, it's the players and their approach. And with all of what's going to come next year in terms of the changes that are happening behind the scenes, they can be massively beneficial, but only if the players take it and run with it. And that's why, so to answer your question, yes, I think the approach that people are having behind the scenes is right. I don't think pouring more money into something like a cash cup is going to be beneficial. Like I don't think changing the cash cup prize pool from 4,000 to 10,000 is going to have as much of a change as people think. It would be overall beneficial, but I don't think it would be the be all end all. But changing like formats and changing the incentive structure for teams to play in these leagues, that would be big. But again, that has to get taken and it has to be pushed forward by the players. There's only so much the rest of us can do on that sense.
Absolutely. And so like ultimately people will fill up the available space, but we run the risk of the exact same thing happening again if the actual individuals don't change the way that they're approaching. Is that
right? You don't want to fill up the space with people who are not taking it seriously like it was before. Not that that's the case for everybody, but obviously, like if you just take that space and you fill it with players rather than fill it with players who are committed and actually dedicated, then you're just going to end up exactly how it was before.
Okay. All right. So why don't we go ahead and was there anything else that you felt like would be important to talk about that we maybe skipped over, didn't talk about enough when it comes to like problems or solutions with NACS?
I don't think anything super concrete. Maybe like the only other thing I can think is like there's a lot of back end talk from players who just like talk back and forth and they like burn a lot of bridges very early on of their career. And I just really can't emphasize enough how that's not really the approach you should be taking.
And that's not
That's really
just in
it.
Counter-Strike either. That's just good life advice right there.
Yeah.
Don't burn bridges where you don't need to. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it all as well. Okay, so let's see. There's so much that has been talked about in the chat, but let's see if there's anything that is a question that would be good. Okay, Kino, do you think the average NACS player would benefit from general IRL team experience, such as being part of a baseball, football, basketball team? If yes, do you think having a proper team experience and general ethics would provide benefits in regards to team performance? In my experience, I can tell when someone's played real sports. I think Mango put it the best in Melee. He's like, you always fist bump your opponent at the end of a match, like in Melee. And he's like, I can tell when someone hasn't played Little League, because like in real life, your coach would never not let you do that, because that's just sportsmanship. Like, you show up, you play, you can talk smack beforehand, whatever it is. When it's over, it's all, it's professional. It's ultimately just a game. If you lost, you got to take it on the chin, but you always show good sportsmanship. And that is something that's also something that's like a huge reason why like the bridges get burned in NACS, or like people get really salty, the saltiest region, as they say. I think that is a really big thing, but it's not really the best climate for real life sports. So we've got to find a new solution, I think.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I agree with you. Like, you can easily tell the players who have real life sports experience because they are the ones who are showing up on time. They're the ones who, like, you can tell, because I used to play soccer for I think 5 or 7 years. I don't even remember anymore. 5 to 7 years, let's say. But if I was late for practice, I would get absolutely shit on by my coach. And I can say that that's the case for like a lot of players. Like, if you're not gonna show up to your team on time, like, you're gonna get in trouble from your coach, because you're now making the rest of your team wait. You're making the rest of the other team wait. Um, and in some sense, like, they wouldn't even wait for you sometimes if there was like a match or something like that. So you, like, the players who don't have real life sports experience are pretty easy to distinguish from the others. And the issue I see is that it bleeds out. Um, the players who don't have experience are not showing up on time, and then you have the players who usually would show up on time, or if they're surrounded by the right people, they would show up on time. You have these players thinking like, oh, if my teammate's going to be DMing 5 minutes before like up until 5 minutes before the match starts, like if the match is at 6 o'clock and they're DMing till 6:10, like, why would I join the server early, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just becomes a cycle like that.
And
So
it's one bad apple, right? I think the thing I love about
yeah,
and always have loved about esports is like, you could have somebody who might not have the like natural genetics to be good at regular sports, like to be at the top
yeah,
level, but they have the same competitive spirit. But the only bad thing is that you can have that competitive spirit, but then be like really secluded in your room alone, and then be whoever you want. You could be like, a 7 foot, 290 pound bouncer online, and talk to people however you want, and like but you wouldn't do that if you were on the field with somebody and you had to talk to people in real life. And you really should try to bring that attitude and emulate what you would say to somebody in real life to what you would say to someone online, because like you're saying, it's really infectious in a bad way that this spills over into the way that other people will talk to each other, or other people will approach, like whether it's cool to show up on time or not, which is a big problem. And the people who didn't have that prior experience in real life, like, they don't really have a reason to bring that into online. And for whatever reason, Europeans are a bit better about like not needing the last word in every argument, or being able to move past something in a discussion. I mean, it's as bad as like, I can even tell the difference between a Canadian teammate and an American teammate. Like, they're actually, seriously, like, you can see that the attitudes are all like, it's a mixed bag. Like, I've had amazing American teammates, but it definitely feels like there's less with just the attitude when it comes to having a discussion, or like deflection, which is a big thing when people are talking to each other, taking criticism, giving criticism, not needing to win an argument, being able to have a discussion. Like, these are huge things. Unfortunately, it's not something that I would like this whole conversation to be completely about, but it is inarguably has always had a huge effect on North America as a whole. Do you want to talk about this bonfire that you started with Whitmer in the middle of California?
So we were at Philadelphia 13, and there was like a fire pit that someone had made inside the venue.
Inside the
But
venue.
yeah, well, obviously we didn't have like a real fire. It was set up on like the secondary stream broadcast or like the just chill, the chill like
Was it
secondary
the beach
casting
chairs and
area.
whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had this fire pit, and we decided that we wanted to make it look real because it was sort of just like a metal thing. So we went and tried to find some sticks outdoors to stack in this fire pit, and of course we're in California where there's like a bunch of palm trees and whatnot, so
Uh-huh.
we couldn't really find any sticks lying around. We had a nice little walk around the block. We got some. We made
Would
it
you just
look
use like
pretty nice.
garbage?
Uh, it's somewhere around the streets.
Whatever you could find. Okay.
We roasted some marshmallows on there,
Nice.
obviously,
Oh, that's
and
so
then
cool.
I proceeded to take the power at the venue out.
Oh man, my first time going to Europe, we had my co-caster Joey brought a power converter for his hair dryer, and then like tried to plug in the his like power bar into the wall in this like small hotel in the middle of France, and just shut down the power on our entire floor. Um, yeah, that was
I
our
was I
experience.
was given so I was taking photos and doing interviews there, and there was like this photo studio set up upstairs. And I asked, I don't remember who I asked. I think I asked one of the admins like, "Hey, is it cool if I just use these for some player shots?" And they said, "Sure." So I plugged in the lights, and then suddenly all the lights in the venue are gone.
Wait, where?
And I
Where are you
have
saying?
this was Huntington Beach, California.
Oh, okay, okay.
Um, and so then I had a bunch of, or I had Steve, if you know Steve from Philadelphia, come up to me, and he's like, "What did you do?"
Yeah.
Because upstairs was also where the servers were set up. Um,
Oh, nice.
so it took down the servers for the entire venue. Uh, it took them. This is also, by the way, this is the second day of the event, and on the first day there had been Verizon had like service issues or something. So there had been no internet for like 5 hours at the venue or something. So matches were delayed for ages as well. So that was the first day. The second day we finally got stuff rolling, and like an hour into the day, I took down all of the power there.
So you're the reason that we're in this place in the North American scene. It's all because of
Of course,
that
naturally.
one moment at our biggest local LAN.
So yeah, I mean they got it back up after about
Okay,
half an hour, 45 minutes, and then I was not allowed anywhere near the top floor for the rest of the
nice,
event.
good. I'm glad they figured out it was you. Okay, so
Yeah.
got another question here from the Morgster. You can take this one. How do you get big NA orgs like CLG, TSM, 100 Thieves, etc., to come back into the NA scene and help like kind of add to the infrastructure? Where's the place for the top orgs? Like when is that?
I think the top orgs were notorious for mismanaging their CS teams.
Yeah,
They just gave way too much control to the players. And in North America, when you do that, you have these players who are just willing to cut players continuously. You have players who are like, there's nobody holding them accountable as much. You have these orgs paying them like inflated salaries, and nobody actually like incentivizing them to do better. Like, look at the way Astralis is set up, where you have like Zonic in control of their roster, and he puts players on notice. Like, if Dupree is not performing, he'll say, "Hey, like, we will bench you in 3 months if you don't like fix your stuff, right?"
hmm
And you had nobody like that in a lot of these teams. Like, you had CLG having their roster, but nobody to actually like be the difference, make those decisions for the org. And if these orgs want to come back, they need somebody like that.
hmm
And I really can't emphasize that more, because TSM has the money for it. CLG has the money for it. Like, you're gonna get these teams for way below market value right now. Um, you just need to have somebody in place to be able to give them that leadership, and that sort of, and give them the right structure behind like their PR, give them the right structure behind like tweeting out a match before you go live, like
Sure.
tell them how to do all of this, right? And give them like either the coach, give the coach like almost GM control in that sense, like allow them to be able to tell players they will be benched if they don't fix this,
Mm-hmm.
and take
Yeah.
that away from the players. It's I like the players cannot have that much control over these rosters anymore.
Absolutely. And
That's
the way they talk about it in Europe, like they're proud. They'll say like Zonic can cut me. When I talk to Astralis players, they'll be like, he has all the power. Like we don't go anywhere without him. He can cut us at any time. They wear that with like a badge of honor. They trust Sonic. Sonic has the power, and that structure just got set up perfectly. And everyone's held accountable. It's you don't want the inmates running the asylum in that regard. And there's absolutely no reason to give the players any of that power or responsibility when they could just focus on making sure they're playing at their best. And realizing that like they can be held accountable for things they say. And there used to be a lot of examples even in Europe where one player just had too much power on a team and got to stay on a team way too long because they were the reason that team started, or they were the connection between an org and whatever. But that's not how it should work. It should be someone who's somewhat impartial who comes in, and that comes back to being a leader once again, whether it's as an IGL or just a leader, like a figurehead, because you could have one of the most high-paying jobs and be one of the most valuable players or people in the scene if you take the opportunity to build up those blocks now. Down the line, like we look at like Alex getting paid whatever 30-40K a month on Cloud9. That's even in Europe. That's how valuable and how hard it was. I was talking to Henry G about where they were going to go with the lineup and growing over IGLs. It's like, who do you even pick, right? You need an IGL that can play the game and has experience. There's just not that many, even in Europe. That's one of the most valuable positions that you could have at the moment. Would provide tons of value and gives you an open road to a coaching role or even a player scouting or whatever role in the future. So just all the more reason to be a leader on your roster and do that extra work. And listen, when you do take on the responsibilities, it's also more fun, right? I don't know if you notice, like in your whatever uni experience, if you like go to school and you just clock in and clock out at the end of the day, it always feels like you're doing too much work. But if you actually spend more time there to like do homework, join clubs, or like be a bigger part of the school in some regard, it's more fun to actually do the work because it becomes more of your day. And that's how the same approach should be taken when it comes to playing CS. Like your IGL shouldn't be the guy to just school you every day, make you wake up, get in for practice, and then show you what you need to do. It's always going to be exhausting. You're going to feel like, oh, I could never do more work than that. But if you were doing the IGL's job, you'd be more enthusiastic about finding more ways to add to the team, being a part of the discussions in a more meaningful way, caring about the strats that get made, and understanding how the sausage is made, like understanding your role in a round and also everybody else's, and having more respect for the IGL role as well. There's so much to be gained from putting in a more effort as an individual on your team and not just phoning it in and doing your job and just doing just enough.
Man, I'm watching like MDL players streaming their official matches, and I'm seeing like the in-game leader call something in freeze time. Three people are talking over him at the same time.
Oh my God, dude.
Like 10 seconds into the round, they're like, wait, what? And then they run into like a place where the in-game leader told them not to go,
Yeah.
or they said to like they told them specifically where to go. And
Yeah.
then they're like, wait, what am I doing? Or like, I don't know that nade, or I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, how is this happening at the MDL level, right? So like you need people to put in time and not have the in-game leader need to micromanage those decisions. You need to know your role, right? Like you said.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we've talked about a good amount of stuff. We're just past an hour now. And I'll give you the floor. Any message out there to the players? Note, I know you're always publicly calling them out, which is much appreciated. I love it. It's always a good chuckle, and I think accountability is a big thing. Is there any one final thing that you want to wrap up with that you want to send to a message, whether it's to the players or to the orgs or anybody in specific?
Yeah, I'll do one to the players and one to the orgs. I'll say to the players, I call you out because I genuinely care about our scene. I genuinely care about trying to make North America as a region better. When I'm saying that you tweeting that you're playing your MDL relegation match drunk because you don't care, or because like two of your players decide to step down, like that's because you should be forfeiting that match if you're not going to take it seriously. Like you're wasting five other players' time with the roster is dead. That's why I'm tweeting stuff like that, because I actually genuinely care about like not making our scene look like a farce. Like you guys should be caring just as much as me, but instead you're going into your team speak with these players and going, haha, like look at this guy like actually caring. That's not something to make fun of though, right? So when you guys are willing to put that effort in, I will big you up. I will do like whatever I can to be able to help support you. I will reach out for interviews. I will like put you in touch with whoever I can. But again, that has to come from you guys. And to the orgs, this is like, despite what I've said about these players, there are players who are now willing to put in this effort, and there are avenues opening up for these teams, for these players to actually get onto teams and do more, especially going into 2021 with some of the changes that might come through. You guys will get a lot more. You guys will have a much higher chance to be able to get your brand out there, but you need the people behind your brand to be able to tie your team together. And so this is a pivotal time for North American Counter Strike where you can get teams below market value. You can get good players, but don't do it out of nowhere. Get someone who knows what they're doing. Get someone to actually build you your roster and get them to control it. And when you do that, you will set yourself up for success. It's not a difficult avenue. You just need someone to be the guide.
I love it. I'm gonna let it end on that. Thanks, Note, for coming on the show. I guess it's our show at this point, episode 1 of NACS. I think this everything like the scene is solved already, so I don't know if there'll be an episode 2, but if there needs to be, maybe we can come back on and do it again. So thanks for coming on, and thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks for having me.